Hello everyone, this is Mystic. This is a mind sear because if you follow me on social media, you know the last podcast, episode 9, my computer decided to shit the bed. The breaker went off, I went, reset the breaker, and when I went to boot my system back up, it was trying to boot into Windows 7. Now for those who don't know, I run Windows 8.1. And since I've never actually had a repair run on Windows 8, I was like, maybe Microsoft didn't change the background for the repair. Well, it turned out that it tried to repair for Windows 7. And I do have some old drives in my system that were Windows 7. So that didn't work, and whenever rebooted it, told me the master boot record was corrupt. Now, in my years of messing with computers, the master boot record getting corrupted on Windows 7, it never repaired correctly for me. Something would always be wrong, and I just have to do a reinstall. So I figured the same thing was going to be true about Windows 8. I just wasn't going to deal with that. The last time I actually had where a master boot record repair worked was back on XP. So I spent all day last Friday, which was, let's see here, July 3rd, getting the OS installed, getting the updates installed, updating back to 8.1, and then getting all my core programs installed. Like I had to have Steam installed, I had to have World of Warcraft installed, and I had to install Photoshop, Premiere, Audition. Those are my three main applications I use from Adobe. So that took a while. And then I had to install Skype to talk with Mike and all that, and Trello. I spent the third and the fourth installing all my applications I needed to continue to create content for the channel, as well as the co-op stuff with Mike and for the podcast. Well, a few minutes before the podcast, I actually realized I never reinstalled OBS. So I had to install OBS, and we didn't get to use our lovely intro because I didn't have the proper plugin for OBS to run the intro. So it was a very stressful time for me during that entire thing. Plus the fact that since Mike's moving and will be away for a while, we did a lot of recording the night before the podcast, this week's podcast on the 10th, or on the 9th, I mean. So we did a lot of recording beforehand. I didn't go to bed, and I stayed up all night just running all that content through, editing it down to around 10-minute episode length and going for it, just rendering it out. So I never went back and checked Skype out. And for people who don't know or don't realize it, Skype has a feature that lets it take over your mic and adjust the volumes. Well, during the sound check before Mike and myself were on the call, my audio was fine. The moment we got on the call, my audio went to shit. And neither of us caught this until after the podcast. So this Mind Sear is going to be a recap on what we talked about on my side of things. It's not the best solution, but it's a solution nonetheless, because I'm not that skilled in audio to be able to pick out where my voice is at and enhance just that level for the audio, if that's even the thing. So the first thing we talked about was faction balance, and as we all know, Mike is a big PvP person. He held this one the most. My input was, since Every Man for Himself was released back in Wrath, why it is still an issue now in Warlords when there's other stuff that has been removed or modified that really didn't need removed or modified. So the Lord community manager was talking about how they have ideas on how to fix it, and just nerfing it to the ground is not an answer. And the humans don't really have a racial that is worth it. And I'm actually all for this, because how many times do we accuse Blizzard of swinging that pendulum one direction and then swinging it way too far the next direction, not actually hitting the nail on the head? So, next thing we talked about was Hellfire BOEs being personal loot only. And this was my big topic of the podcast. For people who don't know, the only way you get a BOE drop in Hellfire Citadel is if it's on personal loot. And that is due to some not great people who were leading plugs but reserving the BOEs. Now, this argument can be made either way. If the Raider, whenever they posted their group in the Raid Finder thing, said, hey, you can come play, but just so you know, BOEs are reserved for guild or blah, then players who join those raids and that happened to them, I do not feel bad for them whatsoever. If you don't read the little notes that the person listening group in says, that's your fault. Now, the reason this is very irritating to me is because I'm the guild master of our guild. So, within the last couple of raids, I've been able to increase everybody's repair bill from the guild a lot. Granted, raiders have more than people who don't raid with the guild, but those people who, in my eyes, are raiding with the guild deserve to have their repairs higher, because they are the ones who are in there with us wiping. Even if we had multiple raid teams, if you were raiding with the guild, we'd have a higher repair cost. But we've only been able to do that because we're at the point now where we didn't need any BOEs from the raid. This is back in Blackrock. So nobody needed it. It went to the guild bank, and we sold it for repairs. Now, when we pugged people, they were told up front in the little message box that BOEs are main spec, then they go to the guild bank. And since I know people don't like to read, when they joined up, I had macros that gave out the loot rules. And that was in the loot rule. And nobody actually had any issues with that. We had one person who didn't read, and it was a night that we had quite a few different plugs. And they started giving me shit, and then the rest of the plugs were like, no, he said that, and he did a raid warning on it. I do give people the opportunity to roll on it. And if you need it, great. I'll be more than happy to give it to you. Now, where this is that pendulum swinging too far in one direction or the other, taking these BOEs away from master looting is a very poor decision on Blizzard's part. Yeah, I could run personal loot on trash and then go, okay guys, if you don't need the BOE you get, give it to me so we can sell it. But that just doesn't feel right at all. Because now I'm requiring people to give the guild stuff that they got on personal loot. And the whole reason we don't run personal loot is when we first started raiding in Warlords, we ran it. But we discovered that people weren't gearing up as fast as if we were doing Master Looter. Meaning, it seemed like only a few people were getting a piece off of every boss, but it was either the same people or, in a couple cases, nobody got loot. I mean, that's what they claimed, If they're lying to me, great. If they're not, which I don't believe any of my raiders will lie to me, but we just weren't being able to gear everybody up as fast as we were used to. And a byproduct of that was I didn't have the mats to enchant everybody. And if you're in my guild and you need an enchant, I will give it to you. So when we switched over to the Master Loader, we were able to gear everybody up faster, and any gear nobody needed, I was able to DE for the mats, which led me to going, oh look, you got a new weapon. You gonna use it? Yeah. What enchant do you want? Well, I take Blah. Here you go. I did write a lovely letter to Blizzard, and again, we've said it in a previous podcast. When you give feedback, don't just go "F you, Blizz, you suck," or don't be like that. Actually, give good constructive feedback. And I feel, while mine was a little more stern, it gave the feedback that this is a bad decision. Now, one thing we always do say is give them ideas. I will admit, whenever I wrote my letter up, I was not in the best frame of mind because I was a little upset about this, and I didn't give the proper feedback. So, how do we get around this? So, talking to Mike last night on the podcast, if it's a guild run, if the icon in your minimap has your guild's banner on it, let the BOEs drop from trash mobs. Simple as that. Now, guilds can still do the BOEs for the repairs, and I know technology's out there at this point where if a team uses the looking for more tool or whatever it's called, and they do not specify in there that, hey, BOEs are reserved for guild or whatever, and I know chat logs are kept, and they don't say it in the raid, then yes, punish that group. But don't punish everybody who's doing as fair as possible while still being able to provide for the guild, for their guild. This was a very poor decision on Blizzard's part, and I cannot wait to see how they rectify it. The other part we talked about was, since my computer crashed, there were some topics in the last podcast I didn't get to talk about, and I just went over what they were. And we're talking about the WoW tokens. I'm actually surprised it hasn't had that much of an impact on the economy as I thought it was going to. I wasn't expecting a huge impact, but I was expecting stuff to cost a little bit more, and it doesn't. Like I said, it did go up slightly from what I was used to, but it wasn't, oh, this rock was 5 gold, now the WoW token's out, it's 500 gold. I do like the idea of the tokens where if you don't have the money to play, if you have the money on all your characters, you can buy game time, which is awesome. Mythic Dungeons was another topic that we had slated to talk about. Now that I've been able to run them more than just one, I will say, like Dave said, need a little more tuning. There are some bosses that even everybody on Vent just hit way too hard. It's not a gear thing. It was just an AoE explosion that was an unavoidable damage. Just took everybody down way too far, and the healer was unable to recover. And it wasn't a random healer or a healer undergeared. It was one of my 3 main healers from my raid. who they have pulled off some interesting stuff in the raids with the other healers being down or out of mana or something. They've pulled off some interesting heals. And whenever they can't recover from something like that, it makes me wonder. And then there are some bosses that it looks like they just increased the health pool, but changed nothing else. So it's one way. It seems like it's too far one way or too far the other way. There are some bosses that have that little change that make the boss more interesting. Those bosses are great. They have more health. They have a new mechanic that isn't, oh my god, it's going to murderize me, but it is going to, if I continue to get hit by this ability, I'm going to fail. And I love that. And time walking dungeons, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed them. At the time of this recording, the only thing we've got to do was the Burning Crusade time walkers. That was great for me because as a player who started up in BC, I never got to see these dungeons at appropriate level. Yeah, I got to go back and run them and do them, but I never got to actually see them personally. So that was fun. Plus, it was nice being able to help people who came back and use that as a tool to help gear them up. We're going to run this to do this, then we'll do this to do this. And that was awesome. Now, a thing we did talk about is we said how mythic dungeons and time walking dungeons seemed like it should be a feature for a new expansion. And we said that multiple times on multiple podcasts, and in a normal scenario, I still stand by that. However, looking at what patch 6.2 dropped, I'm glad these two features were in there because there really isn't much extra to do in 6.2. Once you do your achievement for Tanan Jungle, so you can fly, I personally will not be stepping back into that place. I'll only go there to go to raid. And that's only because it's right there. As far as running around, killing mobs and all that stuff, no. Doing the quest, no. It's a glorified Apex area, and that comes from 6.2 being worked on back in November 2014, before all our feedback was thrown at them saying, hey, this is not a fun environment. So, yes, adding mythic and time walking is what saved 6.2 in my opinion. If not for those two features, I don't know how many people will still be playing that I personally know. And granted, we have the raid we can do, but that's once a week you run that. Whereas Mythic and Time Walking you can run multiple times. Granted, Mythic dungeons you can only run once a week, but that's multiple dungeons you can run. Time Walking grants on the weekends, but still something to look forward to. I would like it if they remove that cap and you just run Time Walking whenever. And then we also talked about, and Mike read comments on this interview about 6.1 and 6.2 being big patches, and what people don't recall from 6.1 is that's when we got Blackrock Foundry. Everyone seems to just forget that we actually got a raid in that patch. And remember, I'm a guy who will slam Blizzard, but at the same time, whenever they have a good idea or they did something correctly in my eyes, I give them praise. And people knocking patch 6.1 really isn't fair. There was content released in 6.1 besides a few small things. It was actually a content patch. Just like 6.2 is a content patch. It has a raid. It has time walking. It has mythic dungeons. other than that, to me, it's not really a great patch. And after we talked about all that stuff, we did talk about the fact that whenever Mike gets back after his move, we are going to have a new series, which will be on my channel's live streamed, called Dear Blizzard, which is Mike takes a topic, I take a topic, bring it to the table, and we give feedback or changes or suggestions on what to change and how to change it. And if there's banter that needs to be had over the idea, there'll be banter. But that is going to be a huge feedback, just topic and just feedback on that specific topic for each side. Granted, our podcast does take into account and give a lot of feedback during our podcast, but this will be more focused on that. I think that's all we actually talked about. So, I'm sorry that I have to do this extra video for like a recap of the podcast, but technology, bad. Yeah, technology bad. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time. Later.